Reflections on the Good News of Jesus Christ for Sunday, the second Sunday of Lent, from the Gospel of Mark. Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzlingly white, such as no fuller on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah appeared to them, along with Moses, and they were conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He hardly knew what to say. They were so terrified. Then a cloud came, casting a shadow over them, and from the cloud came a voice. "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus alone with them. As they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them not to relate what they had seen to anyone until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. The Gospel of the Lord. In his book entitled "'Tis," his sequel to Angela's Ashes, author Frank McCourt writes about coming to post-war America at the age of 18 and his struggle to establish a new life as a teacher. One of his first jobs was teaching English and social studies at a vocational high school on Staten Island. The students were loud and rude. They pelted each other with chalk, erasers, and sandwiches. They ridiculed and abused their teachers. They had little or no interest in learning. Then, one day, while his students were taking a test, McCourt explored the closets at the back of his classroom. They were stuffed with old newspapers, books, and hundreds of uncorrected student compositions going back to 1942. He started reading through some of the compositions. The boys back then yearned to fight, to avenge the deaths of brothers, friends, neighbors killed by the Japanese and the Germans. The girls wrote about how they will wait for their boyfriends to return, get married, and make a new life for themselves in New Jersey. McCourt began reading these compositions to his class. They sat up. They heard familiar names. "Hey, that was my father. He was wounded in Africa." "Hey, that was my Uncle Sal, who was killed in Guam." Dozens of Staten Island and Brooklyn families were named in these papers, some of which were so brittle that they crumbled at the mere touch. Those formerly disruptive, rude, unruly students changed. Amazed by what their teacher had discovered, they wanted to save those compositions, so they began to copy them. For the rest of the term, they deciphered and wrote. Tears flowed as the students read about their parents, grandparents, and other relatives in their extended families. "This is my father when he was 15. This is my aunt. She died having a baby." In a stack of crumbling, forgotten student compositions, a class of Staten Island students discovered the richness of their past and possibilities for their own future. They came to realize the love and values of their families that now exist within themselves and in their own young lives. And perhaps some of those young lives were changed, even transfigured. On the mountain of the Transfiguration, the disciples see in Jesus the life and love of God that dwelled within him. Because of our baptism, that same love lives within each one of us as well, calling us beyond our own needs, wants, and interests. Love that calls us beyond ourselves is transforming. The challenge of the disciples' call is to allow that love to transfigure our lives and our world, transforming despair into hope, sadness into joy, anguish into healing, estrangement into community. Such transfigured people can bring light into even the dark days of Lent. But we may not see the meaning of such moments, and the gospel story tells us why. Did you notice the mention of the cloud appearing, casting its shadow over Peter and the others? There's nothing unusual in that. Anyone who has ever hiked in the mountains knows that clouds can gather very quickly. But there is a very important symbolic meaning here. The cloud in Scripture is the symbol of the presence of God, the divine mystery that, just like a cloud, we cannot see into. So at those times in your life when you cannot see what is happening, or why, or what you are supposed to do next, and you think God has disappeared from your life, perhaps it is because the very presence of God has come over you, surrounded you like a cloud. And all you need to do is to relax in God's presence. And out of the cloud came the same words that were spoken at his baptism. This is my Son, the beloved one. At his baptism, Jesus declared himself ready to be God's Messiah. But now he knows more about what it will cost to do that. And Jesus has come to a new level of readiness to match this new level of awareness. Now, perhaps 2 years after his baptism, he knows there has been a radical change. Now he knows that being faithful to God was going to mean suffering and even death. I could imagine that Jesus' new awareness of what was likely to be in store for him threw him into some inner darkness and turmoil. And the same thing can happen to us. Just when we think God's will is very clear, God's ways, which may have been so obvious and affirming, now may seem very mysterious, even frightening. At this moment, we are called to remember that, just like the Old Testament prophets, we never see more than a glimpse of the mystery and magnificence that we call God. A transfiguration experience could happen to any of us in any of several ways, many of them far more challenging and disruptive than the more modest transfiguration experienced by McCourt's students. Perhaps being in the midst of a very successful career, but then being struck down with a serious illness or disabling injury. Perhaps having one or two normal, active, healthy children, and then being told that the child you are now expecting has some terrible medical condition. Perhaps building a home, starting a business, and seeing that destroyed by flood or fire or some other kind of disaster, not uncommon in this era of climate change. Perhaps realizing, after several years of marriage, that your spouse has some serious medical or psychological condition. Perhaps working 20 years for a company only to be laid off when that company is bought out by someone else. Anything like that could throw us into a time of real darkness. That's not what I expected. That's not what I thought I was getting into. That's not what I was ready for. Okay, but can I become ready now? Shall I live in self-pity the rest of my life? Or can I even imagine that precisely through those unforeseen circumstances, God is readying me for a new understanding of the meaning of my life? In the midst of this crisis, is God giving me a new opportunity? Once again, we can see that this is not just an event in the life of Jesus. It is an event in our lives as well. Every Christian will find that being a follower of Jesus will sometimes mean doing things and accepting things that you had never planned for. If you will open yourself to that and be ready to find God's will in that, then you too can share in this illumination. It might happen at that moment when you have your sheepskin, your career, your family, your prestige, and then wonder if this is all worth it. And you have to re-examine the meaning of your life. If you are open to God at that moment and ready to find God's will in those circumstances, you will discover that this is, in fact, a better way than the one you had planned. It is seeing new opportunity, even joy and hope, right where everyone is saying there is no hope. It is moving from an attitude of saying to God, you can make me do this, but I don't have to like it, to finding promise rather than threat in whatever situations God has led us to in our lives. And what a difference that makes, to be able to find promise rather than threat. Thus, the Transfiguration represents for Jesus and for all of us who follow him a crucial moment of ongoing conversion, ongoing transformation. You see, baptism can take place in a few minutes on a Sunday afternoon in a church. But conversion, that takes a lifetime. A transfiguration experience calls us to let go of former plans and former understandings, to take up a new understanding of God's will, God's way, God's love, and allowing God to lead us on. This is true freedom and true spirituality, being able to move with life as it is given by God, saying, in effect, is this the way you want me to go? All right, Lord, I am ready. This is living out our baptism. It is the readiness to find goodness in the face of mystery, even in the face of chaos. Everyone is a candidate for transfiguration. Has it occurred in your life? Were you ready for it? If it were to occur now, for the first time or once again, would you be ready for it? If not, what is standing? Thanks for listening.